we go. I'm going to step up around the stairs. It's going to make it a little easier for you to hear me over the... Welcome to Grays Armory and Museum. What I'd like to do this afternoon is I'll give you a little history of the Grays and of the building, and then we will wander through the building and then talk to some of the artifacts and so forth that ties in with that. And for those of you who need to use it, we do have an elevator. We'll get you steered around to that. The Grays. Tisha, thank you. Can you ask him to just soft pedal it? Or, oh, okay, that's a good one. Okay.
There we go.
The Grays were formed in 1837 as an independent volunteer militia. Back in those days, there was no National Guard. There was a state militia that later became the National Guard, but there were also these independent militias that were chartered by the state. I kind of compare them to police auxiliaries or volunteer fire departments even. They were a group of local Clevelanders who volunteered to be the backup for the sheriff and the city marshal and so forth. Now, we were originally called the Cleveland City Guards. However, the unit adopted a uniform of gray trimmed in black and began holding drills on Public Square and what is now the bluffs over East 9th Street. And the other folks in Cleveland began calling us the Grays. So about a year later, we said, okay, we'll go with that, and we've been the Cleveland Grays ever since. Now, for the first 20 years almost, the Grays were mostly ceremonial duties. But then we did finally have some official duties. In 1855, a local man had been convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. The rumor was his friends were going to break him out of jail and help him get away, and in those days, county sheriff was basically a part-time job. He had a couple of part-time deputies, so he called out the Grays to guard the courthouse and jail up through and during the execution. In 1858, the Grays were on standby for the Oberlin-Wellington rescue trial, which was a national cause célèbre here in Cleveland. And then, in February of 1861, President-elect Lincoln stopped in Cleveland on his way to Washington to be inaugurated, and the Grays served as his personal escort. We met him at the railroad station and escorted him down to Public Square to his hotel, and the next day we marched him back to the train. It was only roughly 6 weeks later that the Civil War began. On the 15th of April, Lincoln called for volunteers to suppress the rebellion, and by the 17th, the Grays were in Columbus, and we became part of the 1st Ohio Volunteer Infantry, the first regiment raised in Ohio during the war. The Grays would actually serve, in modern terms, the Grays had 3 deployments during the Civil War, in 1861, another in 1862, another in 63-64. The Grays continued as an independent militia after the Civil War, and would serve in 1898 in the Spanish-American War. When the Grays initially volunteered for the Spanish-American War, we got word back from the Ohio National Guard that, well, we've got all the infantry companies we need, we don't need you guys. And a few days later, we get another telegram. It seems that on paper, the Ohio Guard included a battalion of engineers, which only existed on paper. And so the state said, if you're willing to be trained as engineers, you can come on active duty. The Grays said that works for us. We recruited enough friends and neighbors to fill out 3 companies, and everybody went down to Georgia and spent 9 months being trained as combat engineers. And you'll remember from high school history, the war lasted only 3 months, but the Grays and their friends were on duty for 9 months. When they came back, the Grays reverted to our original status as an independent militia. Some of those men, however, liked that engineering stuff they'd been learning. They transferred to the Guard, and today the 112th Engineer Battalion out in Brook Park is the Army officially recognizes the Grays as their parent unit. And when we go up the stairs, those are their colors from World War II hanging on the balcony, on the landing. And the map on the left there is a reproduction of the section of Omaha Beach that 112th was responsible for clearing. Now, the Grays had shared space in a number of different armories over the years. By December of 1892, we were sharing space in what was called the City Armory, or sometimes the Long Street Armory. Longstreet no longer exists. Those of you who know something about Cleveland history know that when they built Terminal Tower, an entire neighborhood disappeared. Longstreet was in that footprint. However, in December of 1892, the armory that we shared with a couple other units caught fire. Wooden building with ammunition for everything from pistols to Gatling guns to cannons. It was a heck of a fire. The place was gone and nothing flat. We decided it was time to have a home of our own, and on Decoration Day, now we call it Memorial Day, but on Decoration Day, May 30, 1893, they laid the cornerstone for this building, and the first event was held in early 1894. Now I can tell you, I'd like to point out that those old militia units, they were part military unit and part boys club. And this was their clubhouse. And as we go through the building, you will see that the front end of the building is the well-to-do boys clubhouse, and back there is the drill hall where all the military stuff actually took place.
How was this funded?
Entirely past the hat. They paid it themselves. The Grays were entirely self-supporting. That's one of the reasons that the Grays were long from the upper class of Cleveland, because if you belonged to the Grays back in the 1800s, you bought your own uniform, you bought your own rifle, and since there were no paid vacations in those days, you had to be the guy who owned the store or the factory, so you could say to your staff, you watch the place, I'm going out for 3 days to drill with the Grays. And thank you for that question. So, at the time the building was built, there was a Broadway quality stage at the back of the drill hall, because one of the things the Grays did is always rent it out and hold events to help raise money to support the place. But also, when this place was built, there was no public square. There was no Playhouse Square. There was no Masonic Auditorium. This was the place to be. When the Cleveland Centennial was celebrated, one of the main balls was held here. The first season of the Cleveland Orchestra was performed here. The first Cleveland Auto Show was held here in the Drill Hall in 1903 with 17 makes of automobiles. And the plaque on the wall over there commemorates that over a span of about 20 years, John Philip Sousa and his band played here a dozen times. So, this was an entertainment center. In 1903, they changed the law. They did away with independent militias, and we became a private club. We reinvented ourselves several times. But we did have a last hurrah. When, in 1816, there was a revolution in Mexico. Pancho Villa and his men came into the United States. They raided a small town in New Mexico. They clashed with the police. The army was sent into Mexico to hunt him down. The National Guard was called out to patrol the border. The Grays volunteered. We were no longer an official unit, but the Grays volunteered. They had to bend a few rules. What happened is we found a National Guard unit over by Dayton that was so short-handed they allowed 78 Grays to join on the buddy system. So they went off and served with that Guard unit for about a year. About the time they were coming back from the border, the United States entered the First World War. That unit, which had been called the 3rd Ohio Infantry, was redesignated the 148th Infantry and became part of the 37th Division and served in the First World War. So that's the last time Grays served together. Since then, we've reinvented ourselves a number of times. Today, we exist as a historical society to preserve this building and to share the story of our citizen soldiers of Northeast Ohio. Now, before we troop upstairs, I'm going to go over here, and if you'll follow me over, we're going to talk about the Secesh Cannon. A little out of sequence, but it works. People wonder, why do we call it the Secesh Cannon? Well, at the start of the Civil War, and if you've read books, you've seen TV shows and movies, and you always hear about, they're talking about Johnny Reb, and it's Billy Yank and Johnny Reb. But actually, the men who went off to the war in the start of 1861 did not call them Johnny Reb. They called them those damn secessionists, or the damn Secesh. And this is the Secesh Cannon because we took it from them. Now, the Grays had no direct role in seizing this cannon. This cannon was made just a few months before the war began for one of the South Carolina militia units. That first summer of the war, 1861, down in what is now West Virginia, but at the time was still part of Virginia, a place called the Cheat River Valley. There were a few hundred Confederate soldiers that went into the valley, and several thousand Northern soldiers came in the other end of the valley. So the Southerners decided it was a good idea to get the heck out. They ended up abandoning some of their equipment. One of the units chasing them was the 1st Ohio Light Artillery, which was from Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, and some of the adjacent counties. They start this thing up. Now, why didn't they use it? Well, it's a different caliber, a different size than the standard cannon that the Union armies were using. So, to avoid confusion, they simply put it on a train and shipped it back to Cleveland as a war prize. For the rest of the Civil War, this cannon, there was a Civil War camp up in what is now Ohio City, all during the Civil War. Basically, it was an induction center. So, throughout the war, this cannon was kept up there. For every time a new unit would leave Cleveland, they'd fire a salute out over the flats. Every Union victory, they'd fire a salute out over the flats. And on the day they learned of Lee's surrender, it was fired every hour on the hour from dawn to dusk. After the war, it was moved down to Public Square. And we've found pictures. Over the next 100 years, it's been in every corner of Public Square. It kept getting moved around. At one point, it disappeared completely. Somebody had stolen it. How you didn't notice a 60 Chevy with this cannon on the trailer, I don't know. But it had disappeared. It was eventually found and put back in Public Square for a short while, and then it disappeared again. And this time it turned out the city had removed it because it was falling apart. Well, a National Guard artillery unit heard a rumor about it, tracked it down, claimed it, brought it to us, and the Grays, with some help from craftsmen, restored it. The wood was all replaced sometime in the 60s. Nearly all of the metal, especially the barrel, the wheel rims and that, this is original equipment, original manufacture. For a few years, the Grays would take it with us when we were in parade. We'd tow it behind us. Then somebody finally decided maybe that's not a good idea to be hauling on the ground. We've been giving it a good home inside ever since. And by the way, I do want to mention in passing, we get industrial historians in here because this style of cannon, and there were other cannon made in this style, just different size, but they were typically made of brass. This is made of cast iron, which was unusual. And there were only a couple of places in the South that could have made a cannon in those days, and this was made in Virginia for the Carolina Guard. So that's the story of the Secesh Cannon.
Is it a smaller ball or a larger ball?
This is larger. This is a 6-pounder, and the standard that the Army was using was a 12-pounder.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, so having two different cannons, meaning that it had to have two different kinds of ammunition, they decided to avoid the confusion. Finding out in the middle of the battle you had the wrong ammunition would not be a good thing. So they decided just to get it out of their way. All right, before we go up the steps, or those of you who want to use the elevator can be shown to the elevator, the round room through the door. So just take a peek in there. It's a little crowded to get in there. I want to mention that that room, which you'll see is set up as an office, but originally, when this building opened in the 1890s, was set up as the ladies' parlor. So that if there was a show or another event in back, it was basically where the ladies could withdraw and hang out separate from the men. Or when the Grays were having a meeting, the wives would hang out there and wait for the guys to get done, and then everybody would go out to dinner. So I'm going to head over to the steps. Oh, yes, the battle streamers are worth mentioning. That's on our Grays colors. I mentioned earlier our ties to the 112th Engineering Battalion. Because the Army Historical Unit officially recognizes us as their predecessor unit, the 112th is allowed to fly all the battle streamers that the Grays earned in the Civil War. And to honor them, the Grays fly all the battle streamers that the 112th earned in the 20th century and the 21st century. And then we have a few other connections to units, and so we carry their battle streamers also. But yes, if you look, you'll see those are Civil War up to the recent war in the Middle East. The battle streamers earned by units that are connected to the Grays.
So the 112th cleared Omaha Beach?
Part of Omaha Beach, yes. You'll see that map if you take the stairs. Okay, I'm going to head over to the stairs before we head up. And if you want to take a quick look in the round room, and then
Try to calm down.
By the way, I will mention, because I noticed that the gentleman taking a close look here, if you step back a bit and look at these two newel posts, just eyeball them a little, you'll find as you get closer that they are not identical, because they were hand carved and kind of eyeballed. So, slightly different size, design, but they are hand carved and original to the building. Okay, folks, if those of you who want to follow me, we're going to head up the stairs to 2, and the elevator, come on with me. I'm on with him. I'll get you on the elevator, we'll meet you at the same place. Again, the colors of the 112 and part of the map of Omaha Beach. These gentlemen
Figured out
are
part of the
presidents
problem,
past
schedule for next
commanders.
day.
These are cool.
C for care. Not. C for
Be nice.
Some of you may know a bit about members, original members lived in those houses. Well, if you've heard anything about those or gone to the museum, you know that they had public areas like the parlor, the dining room on the first floor. The second floor was the family area, the bedrooms. The third floor often had a ballroom. Well, this front end of the building is laid out the same way. You were down in the public areas. There's a ballroom above us. We'll go up there in a minute. But this was the members only floor. The second floor was members only. It's called the club room. And my wife, who is also a member and works here, would clobber me if I didn't mention that, yeah, it was also boys only unless you were bringing the cigars and the drinks and the food for a long, long time. This room where we are was designated the reading room, where the guys sat, had a drink, had a smoke, read the paper, and talked about the events of the day. Through those doors, to my right, is the billiards room, and yes, the two billiards tables, the pool tables in there, are almost as old as the building. They don't get moved often because there are about enough people here today to pick one up and move it. They are original slate and so forth. The next room over here is another meeting room. The back room, the round room, we call the pioneers room. But in the early days was called the veterans room, because when the armory opened in 1894, only members of the Grays who had served in the Civil War had the privilege of using this room. So please feel free to walk into the back end there and take a look at that. So that's a summary of how this floor was used and why it was used. So please feel free to take a few minutes and wander around and check out all of the rooms on the floor. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. And then we'll gather up and go on up to the ballroom. Thank you.
Period dresses.
Black bear. Which one?
The gentleman.
That basic uniform dates back to the 1830s. Now, actually, the shape of the bearskins were all bought prior to 1800. So, and then the rest of the uniform is usually newer, but it's the basic design. Except for the metal. The bearskins, actually, those captains just want to covering bearskin with leather trim. Back in the day, we used to wear bearskin and satin.
Ooh, I like this room.
This would be a nice house.
Yeah, it would. Right downtown. I love the stained glass.
Yeah. Nice couch.
I think this would be a good look for me.
It's giving snake river. It's always fun.
Yeah, it is. How many in your group today?
Oh my gosh.
Not in mine or not. I served in the Olympic tours. We all work on that. Needs constant.
By the way, I'm also pointing out as you're wandering around, if you look over here, servants call bell. So, as I said, the guys didn't fetch, they were bringing some cigars.
Where's the bell? Where's the bell? I'm sorry. This looks pretty. This is cabin.
Yeah, it does.
Natural causes. Staff came in one morning, found him laying in the middle of the building. Locked up and had a heart attack. Some of the guys who knew him, he was a pipe smoker. And as you guys may know, most pipe smokers have a favorite flavor of tobacco that they smoke forever. Some of the guys were old enough to remember him. Don't have to be that old. These guys were in the 1990s and 2001, something like that. So there have been times when they've been here working, painting. We do a lot of patchwork in buildings. They would swear they smelled his pipe tobacco. They assumed he was making sure they were doing the work right. That's the story that impresses me. Some of the others, like I said, I'm a non-believer. Some of the others may have been alcohol involved. There are people who claim that it is.
Where was this taken?
That one, I don't know off the top of my head. I believe may be from the border campaign in 1916, but I'm not sure.
It's the top of five, that's why the thing is here.
Yeah, that's when, I believe that's when they were down on the Texas border for a year. One of my favorite pictures is this little one up here in the corner. Because you can't see it from down here, but on a cleanup detail one day, I mean, you can see it's a large group of Grays in a parade. Happened here. But up there on the cleanup detail, I was able to find the legend that says, Cleveland Grays, personal escort to King Rex, Rex Parade, Mardi Gras, New Orleans, 1905. Then when do we get that gig again? Not that my wife would let me go, but it would be nice. That's true. All right, folks, we're going to gather up and we're going to head up to the third floor. And again, those of you who need the elevator can be escorted up there. Even had a band. Those are paid musicians who provide uniforms and made them parade. But you'll notice that the east side parking lot used to be a church. So that's what they're standing in front of, the side standing in front of the armory. And now as you hit the landing going up, these are pictures from the time on the border in 1916 as part of the Mexican border campaign. All right, where we go?
The tour is 4 hours long.
Oh, nice. It's cool.
Building steak.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the ballroom. Dining and dancing over 130 years has gone on here. One of the function cars, I mentioned downstairs, the Grays have reinvented ourselves many times since we ceased to be a military unit. In the 1950s, the Grays functioned basically as a downtown businessman's club. And there was a bigger kitchen back there, and lunch was served in here every day. Members could wine and dine their, businessmen could wine and dine their clientele. Now, through those double doors at the library, that we're not able to use right now because it's under repair. But at one time, again, harking back to the early days, that was the ladies with the drawing room. Because if there was a banquet in here, at some point in the evening, it would be time for the men to have brandy and cigars, and the ladies would withdraw and go have sherry and conversation in the other room. The pictures on the wall, these gentlemen in uniform, they are not members of the Cleveland Grays. They are members of the 1st city troop. Like the Grays, they started as an independent militia. But while the Grays were infantry, these guys were cavalry. And unlike the Grays, although we ceased to be a military unit, with the end of the independent militias, they actually became part of the Ohio National Guard, became first Ohio Cavalry, and later the 107th Cavalry, Ohio National Guard. Those uniforms, however, which you can tell are not regular Army issue, persisted into the 20th century. And again, if you look at the names on there, there are some of the leading lights of Cleveland from the 1890s. I always say that if you were a young man from a well-to-do family in Cleveland in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and you liked horses, you joined them. And if you weren't so all about horses, you joined us. But you belonged to one or the other. Part of it was community service. Part of it is what we now call networking. A couple of those gentlemen are named Bolton, as in Francis Bain Bolton and Congressman Bolton. And the Grays had a member by the name of Rockefeller, John D. Let's face it, if you're a young man starting your career, the fact that you march next to John D. Rockefeller every month doesn't hurt your chances of finding a job somewhere in Cleveland, unless you make them angry. That's the story here of the ballroom. We're next going to go into the Burton Mess. Please be careful as you go in there. You're going to have just one door. There's a step down, so be careful as you enter. If you'll follow me over here, we'll go into the Burton Mess. Would anyone care to venture a guess at the primary function of this room? Now, I do want to say, there have long been rumors about a speakeasy here during Prohibition. That is not true. For one thing, this room did not exist during Prohibition. In the early 1920s, there was a fire that gutted the drill hall. The drill hall had to be rebuilt, and this structure was added to the front building at that time, and until the 50s it was basically just a storeroom. In fact, this looks like somebody's 1950 rec room, basement rec room, which is kind of the way it was laid out. In the days of the 50s and 60s, as I mentioned, and maybe into the early 70s, the Grays were a private club, and we did not have a liquor license. And that's why we have all these doors over here. Liquor lockers. Every member had his own liquor locker, and then you'd buy sit-ups. Now, right now, that's just the facade. When we put in the elevator, we had to get rid of the actual cubby holes behind it. But there are two good stories associated with those. One was that when we cleaned them out, we found some booze that had been there forever. Some of it was high grade, some of it was like high school cheap. The other story is that in the year 2000, I think it was 2000 or 2004, one of those, the vice presidential debate was held in Cleveland over at Case Western. The Republican Party rented the Armory for its after party. Well, the Secret Service came here and wanted all of these opened up so they could search them. The other part of that story is, as our president was leading them through the building, one of the Secret Service agents says, "There's a lot of guns in this place." And he said, "Well, what part of Armory?"
Right.
The original of this photograph, not painting, this is a reproduction The original belongs to the Western Reserve Historical Society. Those are the Grays. Those are shakos rather than the bearskins. When the Grays first started out, we wore a shako, which think of, some of you have been over at the Nutcracker, the cylindrical leather hat. That's really a shako. The Grays wore those for about the first 10 years, and then we got a commander who liked things British and put us in the bearskins that we are still wearing. But that's the Grays on parade in Public Square in 1837 or 8. The church in the back is the congregation of the Old Stone Church. A couple of buildings ago, but their congregation. And so that is the public square. One other thing I like to tell, we call this the Burton Mess because it's named for Harold Hitz Burton. His picture is right there. He donated all of these posters, by the way. These are World War I French Bond posters that he collected and donated. My day job is lawyer. That's why I like to tell this story. Burton he was president of the Grays, but then he did a few other decent things because he was mayor of Cleveland and United States Senator from Ohio and Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He is unusual not unheard of, but unusual, in that he is a Republican who was put on the court by a Democrat. Harry Truman nominated him to the court. Harry Truman nominated him to the court, and he was confirmed 94-0 in the days when there were only 96 senators with no hearings. That story is fairly well known. There's some backstory about how Harry Truman came to pick him. It was the first vacancy of the Truman administration. The Republicans had recently taken over the Senate, and some of them were making noises about, we don't care who Truman nominates, we're going to reject him just to show Truman who's boss. So Truman nominated a sitting Republican senator and dared them to turn on their own. They didn't. But the further backstory to that is, you see, they were two very different men. Truman, as everybody knows, he was a farm boy from Missouri and kind of up through the ranks. And Burton was from a well-to-do family in Connecticut and went to the Ivy League, and he was a lawyer. But what they had in common was that they were World War I combat veterans. Some of you know that Harry Truman first became nationally known when he was a senator, and he was head of a committee, a Senate committee that was investigating fraud and abuse in military procurement. What people don't know is then Senator Burton was the ranking Republican on that committee. And basically, both of them had the attitude that if you were selling crappy equipment to the Army, they were going to bust you. And that's what they did. And so that's how Harry Truman came to trust a member of the opposite party enough to put him on the bench. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to Grays Armory Museum. If you have any more questions, we'll be happy to try to answer them. And again, thank you. You can head on back downstairs, and I hope you've enjoyed the tour.
Oh, this is amazing.
Yes.
Now, the theatrical organ is playing today. You're welcome to stay as long
Oh,
as
that's
you
true.
like.
You know what? Yeah, I can probably make a few comments in the drill hall when we go down to the organ. Thank you for reminding me.
How do you fund your repairs right now?
Well, one, we're trying to get back into renting the place. We have weddings, we have reunions, we have whatever in the building, all kinds of events. In fact, one of the things I often point out in the ballroom is before COVID, what seemed to be in vogue is to have the wedding ceremony here in the ballroom, move down and have cocktails in the club rooms, and then everybody goes down onto the main floor and has dinner and dancing in the drill hall, and then you're at the first floor, we can get them out the door. So, all right, we're going to head downstairs, and yes, I will have a couple of things to say about the drill hall, and go down, and there are a couple of people from the Organ Society who can tell you more about the organ than I could. Yes, down on the first floor. Down off of the drill hall.
There's posters on the wall.
About 90.
Sorry.
We're always looking for more. Not a rifleman, it's just a way.
What's your step?
We're not able to do that on the tour, but, yeah. So we- yeah, we used to rent that out to the CCW training quite often.
So this room is called the Mess.
The Burton Mess.
Reproduction, you say?
Yes. Yeah, the original's with the, Western Reserve Historical Society.
So that's new meaning of BYOB, huh?
That's right. Yeah, that's how the club functioned in those days. They brought your own and then bought a set.
So this is all Burton.
Yeah, we donated all of those posters.
That looks like the radios.
Yeah, it does. Take this room is. Well, thank you for coming.
Yes, you're welcome. This is like the size of like my mom's old house's like entire plot of land.
Look how tall this is.
I didn't even realize that was an actual person playing.
And there's a balcony up there and everything.
It's really nice, but it's kind of boring. Like, it doesn't have any like
Life.
design you expect. You know what I mean?
They said that there's a rifle.
Not allowed to.
Yeah, I think it's not part of the, I don't know, not part of the tour. I don't know. You guys rocking out. For 20 bucks you play a little Ricky.
Yeah.
That's kind of a famous painting. The dude that painted it was from Wellington, Ohio.
Oh, really?
And they made fun of him for it because they didn't think it was a serious painting at first. Now it's like, oh, it's a big deal. Maybe 20 bucks to go sit next to him on the bench.